So hi, I'm Ondřej from Charles Games, and this is Vít, our lead designer and designer of Svoboda 1945 Liberation.
Hi.
And we're here to talk about our approach to history and how it is to make a game and approach a game project that is about real history and real historical traumas. But before we get into that, because Vít has a lot of stories to tell, and that is actually a pun intended because it's all about narratives and stories, we're going to show you our trailer so you know what you're dealing with. So let's get into it.
Když vám před očima zabijou kamaráda, tak na to nikdy nezapomenete.
Pamatuju si, že teta si směla zabalit jen to nejnutnější. Kufry nesměly vážit víc než 50 kilo a balila je pod dohledem českých vojáků.
Zabili je, ale já vím dobře, kde jsou ty hroby a kde je zakopali.
Vykašlete se na ten průzkum, šetříte si práci. Ta škola dělá ve vesnici zlou krev. Lidi nezajímá to, co bylo před 50 rokama. Lidi zajímá to, co bude zítra.
And now also as a part of LudoNarraCon, because you can play our demo, and also we're going to be playing the demo tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So, but Vít, we have seen a lot of things in the trailer. So what's Svoboda about? What's the story we are going to be talking about?
Well, the game is actually a sequel to our previous game, Attentat 1942, which narrated the story of Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia through the eyes of different individuals. Essentially, it was a story, or it was a game based on 8 different stories. And while you play the game and progress it, you got to know how the occupation of Prague, Czechoslovakia, looked like through the eyes of very ordinary civilians. And we selected very different people. And Svoboda 1945 Liberation is a sequel to this one. And essentially, it talks about what happened after the war. So while Attentat 1942 was set in Prague and was set in the time after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, who was a prominent Nazi officer and lead architect of the Holocaust, Svoboda is deliberately set in a small village in the Czech-German borderlands, where Czechs and Germans coexisted for centuries. And after the war, actually the village witnessed maybe the most violent period was happening at the end of the war, when Czechoslovakia was being liberated from the Nazis, and also immediately after the war, where the German-speaking Czech citizens were forcibly expulsed from Czechoslovakia. And also in the years following the war, communists communists won elections, and they actually organized coup d'état. And in the village, or generally in countryside in Czechoslovakia, the communists forced farmers to enter into collective farms. They confiscated their property. And all these things are actually happening on the perimeter of a small village. And you in Svoboda arrive to the village as a young historian. Your task is very mundane. You have to investigate local school and decide what to do with it. And once you do that, you talk to different people, and you discover how the past still stirs blood in the village, and how the past is actually still pretty much present in what's happening in the village now. And yeah, that's kind of the opening of the game.
Yeah, but before we get to why this events stir blood even today, no, not blood, but stir emotions even today in today's politics and society, kind of moving from Prague to a small village seems pretty local, but I'm sure you have some cool answer to why should somebody like who's from, I don't know, US, Portugal, or South Africa should care about that story? Like, what's the overarching take away for folks who don't live in the borderlands or in Czech Republic?
Yeah, actually, I think the same way, like asking about attentat, like if a story about, you know, particular part of Central European history, which is very local, the assassination of a Nazi officer and its aftermath, how, you know, what does the story tell to foreigners who doesn't know the context? And I was actually in Florida. There was ITSEC some years ago when we are competing in some award, and there were like local school children were playing the game, and I was like watching them, and I saw them, you know, playing and going through the dialogues and mini games, and then I asked them like, what do you, you know, what do you make out of the story? Do you understand what's going on? And he told me, not exactly. Like, we don't know exactly, you know, all the details the people are talking about, but we clearly understand it's a story about like bravery and treason, and about, you know, people, ordinary people being caught in very extraordinary times, in very, very hard times in totalitarian regime. And I think these same can apply to liberation, because you clearly see that it's actually not a game about one particular village, but it's a game about very important questions. For example, you know, about revenge and justice, about
And also about family. I mean, it's
and
it's not
also,
only
yeah,
about one village, but also about your family. Like,
yeah, and that's important. We actually, I think you saw it in a trailer a bit, that once you go to the village, you actually discover that your own granddad was, immediately after war, it seems he was stationed in the village, and he was kind of somehow part of what happened in the village. And you don't really know what and why, because he never talked about that. And so it's like kind of also the game is about how you relate to your own family past. And that's what we know, for example, from Attentat. Several people who played the game told us that once they finished the game, they actually started to ask questions in their own families. You know, they started to talk to their grandparents and parents, how they lived through the war, or, you know, during communist times. And the final point, I would say, there is a final like layer of liberation, which is important, is how we commemorate past and how we deal with our own national troubled past and histories. Should we commemorate it? Should we forget it? Because there are like people in the village who would like to, you know, tear down and destroy all the remnants of the past, kind of to stop, you know, reminding them what happened. And there are other people who want to commemorate it and make it, for example, as a memorial site. And that's pretty much real what was happening, you know, in the Czech countryside in the 90s. And I think it's like, even today, many people can relate to that. Like, how should we commemorate our troubled and past, particularly where there are different viewpoints on this past?
yeah, I also think there's a lot of different nations and different countries with their own traumas. So that I, at least as a part of Jarl's games, I also hope it's like relatable to people with different national histories. But I want to get into the topic of our talk because we're at LudoNarraCon, and that's the word narrative in it. So you talked about remembering history. So why to remember history through video game narrative, or what challenges and what's it called? It's SWOT analysis, right? So it's like, what strengths and weaknesses does gameplay narrative for working with history have?
Well, as I think video games are absolutely awesome medium for telling stories, and they are actually great for telling even the most intimate and most personal stories, including, you know, stories of you and like real stories of you and your family. And there are tons of games dealing with history and war, but I would say most of them kind of tend to schematize history and war and present very narrow part of it. Typically, if you look at war games, they are very realistic in terms of, you know, textures, in terms of geography, and in terms of technology of war. And there is almost like fetishization and romanticization of war. There's like a focus on the technology and weaponry. And in most of these games, what is completely missing is the broader context, and especially the perspective of civilians, the perspective of ordinary people who were caught in the war, why things happen, and what are the broader and longer consequences. And that's something I think we try to change, or we try to challenge in both Attentat 1942 and Svoboda 1945 Liberation. I mean, there are a few games which try to do that. And like we all know, you know, like, be it like This War of Mine or True Darkest of Times or My Child Lebensborn, there are games which don't, which try to deal with troubled memories, but there are not many. And I think games can be great for that because they, in particular, they offer you to see a certain situation or go through a certain situation from different viewpoints. From like you can talk to different people and see completely like different perspectives, and that's exactly what we try to do in Svoboda, where we collected, very different memories. So we had like 6 historians in the team who collaborated with us.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
And we collected like real testimonies, and we like kind of changed them and merged them together to create some fictitious characters. And we deliberately have, people who fought the Nazis, they were in resistance, people who are in regular army, people who are responsible for the expulsion, for the forced expulsion of German-speaking citizens. Then we have, memories of people who've been expelled as Germans for being Germans with their family. We have people who lost their family farms to communist collectivization, and where
we also have a son of a former communist officer, right?
Exactly, and we have people who actually
in the demo actually
we have like people who actually participated in the communist coup d'état because they simply believe they are building a more fairer and better world. And all these stories and all these so these people do not necessarily tell you different versions of history, but they definitely tell you very, very different evaluations of the past. And you as a player are put there, and you have to very critically kind of evaluate what these people are telling you and make sense out of it.
Yeah, and also I'd guess like a big part of that is also empathy. Like not only that you have multiple perspectives, but you can like really feel it when you're discovering your family history. But I'm also we also wanted to talk about some design challenges, or not like design, but like design narrative challenges that dealing with history as such as that entails. So I know I wasn't there, but you were there when Svoboda was being written by you and historians. So what was the biggest hurdle you had to jump over to?
Actually, yeah, there are actually two. I would say there are two really huge challenges. One was the historians at the beginning were very skeptical about the medium. When actually we approached them and we told them, we would like to make a video game about Nazi occupation, and then another one about the expulsion of certain Germans and about the communist times. They were very skeptical, feeling video games are essentially a format which inherently schematizes, which simplifies, and these particularly these periods of history are very high. They were afraid of the possible, that when you schematize these memories, it's not only simplifying, but it might be almost offensive to many people, especially those who lived through times or
their relatives they live today.
Yeah, and for example, their relatives, and also so there was one thing. It took quite a long time we talked to them, we showed them, the concept, we talked how we would like to do it, and I think finally we persuaded them. But I think it took very long before I think once they saw the thing moving, they kind of said, okay, it's okay. Like we are okay with that. And the second challenge is, or it's kind of tied to the topic of this conference, LudoNarraCon, that or the festival, that essentially in video games you have various ways how to approach past, and one typical is that you allow players to play past. You allow them to change past. So you are there, you make decisions, and you change what's happening. And we decided in the beginning we won't players allow exactly that, or not, in the full scale of the past, because there are some very important ethical and also game design challenges. Because if you have to kind of like take very subjective and very contested past, for example, let's say the experience of a Holocaust camp survivor,
and that's an actual character in our game. Memory of an actual character.
We have a character who went through the camps, and if you would like to make a game out of that, you essentially would have to break the very complex and very loaded reality and break it into rule system, essentially saying, if you do that, this will be the consequences, this will happen. And that's, I would say, schematizing at best and offensive at worst.
So like a prisoner escaping a camp with like stamina like in Dark Souls, that would be horrible.
And there are actually games who tried to do that, and they failed. They failed, even though the authors had really, I would say, the best intentions. And the reason I think it's the kind of the vulgar schematization of by rule system. I think it's possible. I actually don't. I think it's possible, but it's extremely hard to achieve that. And we decided we won't go that way. We will actually these very intimate and very ethically loaded and emotionally loaded parts of our game, we will convey them to the players through narrative. So the game is actually happening today or in 2001 when you arrive to the village and you essentially talk to people, and depending whom you choose to talk and how you frame the questions, you get to different layers of the story, and you get to different kind of different perspectives on what happened, and then you have to decide, whom to trust, what to do, because all these characters, not only they present you with different evaluation of the past, but they have their own agenda, and they want you to decide in a certain way because you have certain authority in the village, and they want you to do something. And so I think there's like a very powerful like dynamic between you as a player and the character, because you have your agenda and they have their agenda, and you have to balance what's happening. So
is that like a takeaway for other developers or other narrative writers that, I don't know, you would see you would like to see like a more full-fledged characters with their own agendas, or what's the lesson there? You're also a teacher, so don't.
Well,
don't
definitely, that's actually something I really love to see in video games, when I feel that the characters are not there just to give me a piece of information or push me, give me some certain object or push me somewhere to the story, but it feels, when you talk to them, it feels they are real and they have some real agenda, and they do actually something which changes the gameplay or which changes the environment. Like, so that's something I really love. But by no means, what we did when we were starting, we had absolutely no, I would say, idea what will be the end, how far this project will take us.
Yeah, it's 3 years now, I think, right?
Yeah, it's even more.
Yeah, but
the
actual name Svoboda has been around for 3 years. I remember.
3 years, yeah. So it's a very long time. So I wouldn't say that, but definitely what really helped for us, it's like we had like each I would say why the characters feel, for me, they feel really like real when I even today when I talk to them. And I think that's because we in the beginning had an idea that we'll have like professional scriptwriters, and the historians will just give us some kind of information or some concept, background info, and then we will hire the professional scriptwriters who will write the dialogues. What we got from that was it looked like a theater play or kind of or a movie. It was very kind of what you expect from a standard war movie, and we decided we wanted something different. So we actually turned the roles, and we asked the historians to be game designers, and we told them the real stories, the real stuff, so write the dialogues yourself. And then actually the scriptwriters and game designers were the consultants who just change it so it's kind of like playable, it's thrilling, it's dramatic. So we kind of changed but all the dialogues were, or the original versions of dialogues were all written by historians. And that's the reason is that unlike us, they really went through hundreds and hundreds of real testimonies of people who went through the things we are describing in the game, and they simply know it, and they also know the language and the things. So when they wrote the person, it looked really very, very real to me. And also, like, I think what helped, we hired when we for Attentat, we hired non-actors, so there's kind of like certain kind of feeling of authenticity in the how they talk to you as a player. We had a different strategy in Svoboda Liberation, but still I think it's
yeah, I think people reacted to our players, to our characters quite strongly. But also, like you said like it feels powerful to you, but I also know, but not entirely. So like, believe me or not, like that's our viewers believe me or not, but like I also don't know about this, but there is some personal connection for you, right? Into the topic that Svoboda deals with.
Yeah, actually, yeah. All all of the games we are working on now have kind of a personal meaning for me. But this one is like, because my family comes from a small village, which is very close to Sudetenland, which is very close to the borderland with Germany. And my father was actually born in 1938. So he was actually born just before the war. And he grew up during the war. And when he was in a very formative year, he actually witnessed in the village all this stuff, the expulsions and also the rise of communists to power, the collectivization and everything. So kind of my family history is pretty much connected to this particular time period and these particular events. So in a way, going to deeper into, going through the memories and talking to historians, it kind of like, I actually found myself in a similar position as the main character in the game. That there was actually a point where I knew that, for example, there is that the communist secret police had a file on my father, and I never retrieved it. And it was actually during working on Svoboda, I finally kind of said, "Hey, this is the time. Like, let's do that." And I went to the archives and retrieved the files to kind of see what's there. So yeah, it's kind of, I think. It kind of like very personal meaning, I would say, not only playing the game but also designing the game on such topics.
Yeah, and also I think, well, at least like my grandpa, he had his, what was it, pub taken away by communists, but also our programmer Andrzej, who's streaming tomorrow, and by tomorrow I mean Saturday, and also Sunday and Monday, basically all of the remaining days. I think he has roots in Volhynia, which is this Ukrainian region with Czech minority, and we have actually one of the central characters of Svoboda is also descending from Volhynia. So there's actually a lot of slowly uncovering connections to our dev team, which is incredible.
Yeah, that's actually one. Yeah, you actually started that. There's quite, I would say, forgotten layer of history, and narrative-wise, these are like really powerful stories. That once the Czech-German borderland was essentially, like almost 3 million people were expelled. So like, essentially, it was empty. Then after the war, it was resettled. It was resettled by newcomers, and also actually the Czechoslovak government relocated the Volhynian Czechs, who were actually Czechs who, in the 19th century, they left Bohemia, they left the kingdom, and they went to Russia because the Tsar invited them to kind of start communities there, and gave them some farms. And then actually after the Second War, descendants of these people were invited to return back to Czechoslovakia, and they returned and they resettled the borderlands. So, and these stories, their stories are extremely powerful because they not only witnessed the birth of communism in the Soviet Union, but also they, most of them served on the Eastern Front. They fought the Nazis, and they actually went with the Red Army, and they've been part of the liberation of Czechoslovakia. So, and we actually have these stories also in our game. And as you said, yeah, it turned out our programmer is actually a descendant of a Volhynian Czech. And I think it's, if you look in, that's kind of common for Central Europe, that your roots are pretty much, pretty much connected to all these very turbulent things which happened in the 20th century.
Yeah, I also remember that one of my friends, she just like recently, and by recently I mean few years, found out like the entirety of her family's history, and actually she was growing up in the farm that was resettled after the Germans were expelled, and she had quite kind of like, I'd say, very hard reconciliation period for her, when like she was remembering all this childhood stuff, and actually a lot of her beloved objects she used to play with, or like clock or some ceramic animals and stuff like that, was actually left over by Germans. And you saw that by you, I mean our viewers, you saw that in the trailer, like they only could pack only so much. So yeah, this is something that I guess it's, yeah, maybe more present that I'd even guess in families throughout Czech Republic, and maybe even Europe. And that also brings us to the last topic, and actually that's the topic that's in the name of this talk, and that is that this history, or at least part of it we're talking about in the game, is still stirs blood, still stirs emotion. So, could you give our viewers who are not necessarily acquainted with it some background, what we are dealing with here, and how did we approach it, or did you as a lead designer approach it? Because you
Yeah,
had to know you're making a game that's gonna, at least in Germany and in Czech Republic, it's gonna be problematic, or not problematic, but challenging to present in the right way because it
well,
has.
actually, yeah, I actually hope it won't be that challenging because of the way we deal with that. It's this topic is pretty much contested. It's still like really hotly debated, and it's still a political issue, like because of so many ties connected to it.
Yeah.
But the same goes for the communist collectivization
Yeah,
because
but
like
like but like you didn't say it, but like the main topic is yeah, like the part like Czechs taken apart in the explosion of Germans,
yep,
and
yep,
a lot of atrocities that actually took place there.
yeah,
We
yeah.
also depict in the
And and also like what we should deal with the game and what is important for the life in the village is, I would say, the changes in property, like that the farms were confiscated, and then after Velvet Revolution, after the communism, after communism fell, they were returned back, and then this kind of these things are still pretty much, or might be still pretty much live in the village. And I think all these kind of historical traumas, which, and it's in a way it's a trauma because in our first game, Attentat 1942, the historical events you're talking about were kind of more black and white, because we are talking about we are talking about Nazi atrocities, and we are talking about survivors, so, and resistance, and collaboration. So it is kind of more clear. In liberation game, both the expulsion of certain Germans and the communist coup d'état, it's permanently something which was perpetrated by Czechs, or it was like kind of it's a part of our national history, and they are far more it's far more contested. But I would say the way we deal with it is the same as in Attentat, that we, as the game doesn't present you one right narrative. The game really allows you to see this very complex and very complicated period or events from our past through different lenses, and then it's up to you how you approach it and how you kind of make sense out of it. And that's one, as I said in the beginning, it's a very strong aspect of video games, that you simply can relive, or you can go through some events through different times and through different perspectives. And games are, I would say, great medium for that.
So I guess this is also so games are also an example of, and I quote what you said before we started this interview and this stream, that to tell stories as a human experience, or like basic human experience, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think that's something we all really connect to, like telling stories and listening to stories, and that's why I think narrative, specifically narrative games, and like especially like new ways how to tell stories, how to are important, and will be more and more important, especially now, with the we are recording this during a COVID pandemic, where so many people are locked down or quarantined, and games are one very powerful medium, which not for also for like connecting to other human stories. So that's why, and I think that's where we'll see more and more games based on personal stories, because I think not in most in either your life or life of your family, or your surrounding, there are some very powerful stories which should be told, and games might be the medium you can tell the stories through.
So I think that's a great shout out to all our great colleagues that are streaming all over and being here on LudoNarraCon. So, and it's also a great dot after the talk. So yeah, thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, our Discord, the link is there, is open. If you have any comment or question, please play the demo. Please leave us a feedback, presumably on the Discord. And on Saturday, we're streaming our demo gameplay with me, and also our programmer and our QA head, Andrea. On Sunday, we will have a talk about our studio, more about like the business side of things with Lukáš, our lead project officer, and also on Monday we will have a full game, not walkthrough, but we will have a gameplay of some parts of the full game with the rest of our teams. So yeah, please tune in, and thanks so much, and have a nice rest of the day, which is, I guess, true at any given time.
Okay, thanks, and have a
Thank
good night,
you.
because for me it's a night time. So thanks and good night.